Today in this session, we're going to be covering the Patriarchs, which is the second time period out of the 10 time periods. But we'll quickly just recap the last session, which was creation. And we looked at how God created the world and mankind to be in that perfect relationship with him in the garden. And he gave them the commission to multiply out the beauty of that place, as well as just the abundance and the order that he had set up in the garden. But unfortunately, Adam and Eve made a bit of a decision that caused a break in relationship with God, and sin entered the world. But the way God responded was not one of punishment, but one of love and of mercy. And he promised that someone would come and redeem mankind back to God's heart through the offspring of the woman. So it's that thread of the offspring to come that we're going to follow shortly as we take a look at the patriarchs. But as the people also began to multiply, fulfilling the promise that God had made to them, we also see that sin is multiplying. And so that's we see, the time and time again, the enemy trying to take away that option for the Redeemer to be born through the family that we're going to look at right now. So in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, we see God is focusing on the whole world. So we're looking at the creation story, we're looking at all peoples, we're looking at, all peoples are affected by the events and the words that are taking place. But from chapter 12 onward in Genesis, we're going to zoom in and look at one family, the line of Abraham, and how God's beginning to shift his focus onto them, and how he's going to use them to bring about the redemption of the world through their family line later, with the birth of Jesus much later in the New Testament. So the first patriarch that we're going to look at, there's 4 patriarchs, so we're going to start with Abraham. We've all heard of Abraham, I'm sure. He was born Abram, and he was the eldest son of Terah, and he lived in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans, which was far east of the Near East, ancient part of the world that the Bible kind of focuses on. And so Terah and his family go to travel to Canaan, but they only make it halfway and they settle in the land of Haran. Now, both Ur of the Chaldeans and Haran are actually centers for idolatry, and they have a lot of cult worship. They worship a moon god. And so Terah and his family probably were polytheistic and had multiple gods that they worshipped. So it's actually interesting that God chooses these people, but brings them out and is like, I'm going to introduce myself to you as the one true God. So then in this place of Haran, Abram himself, he gets the call, and God promises him he invites him to go to this land. And so I'm just going to read it in chapter 12, verse 1-3. God speaks to him and he says, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." And so we have the first covenant that God's making with Abram in this moment, where he is blessing not only Abram, but he's saying all the nations will be blessed through you. And that's kind of that hint of actually the promised Messiah, the Redeemer that's to come, is going to come through this line of Abram. So from Haran, Abram and his family traveled to the promised land. And in Genesis 15, we have this cry of Abram's heart where he's asking God for a son. And once again, God comes in and confirms this covenant with him. And he says, promises him that son and that his descendants will fill the land and they will multiply and inherit that region in Canaan. In chapter 17, we see God then renewing this covenant with Abraham. He's an old man now. He's still waiting for this son that's been promised. And God gives him another covenant. He renews it, echoing the promises that he made to Adam and Noah earlier. And so he says, "Now when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, 'I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly.' Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, 'As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall you be called Abram, but you shall be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generation for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So that's in Genesis 17, 1-8. And so we see this, Abraham's name is changed to Abraham, which means a father of a nation. And God actually, the H in his name, Sarai's name is also changed from Sarai to Sarah. And it's this letter in the Hebrew language that it's like a window or a door. It literally means hey, like the letter is hey. But it kind of means behold, look, but you have to say it hey, like it's this breath. It's this the breath of God himself that is being breathed into them as part of like just that statement he's making that actually you're now set apart for me, and I'm going to bring my redemption of the world through you and your family. Yeah, so one of these descendants that's promised is going to be that offspring of the woman that will save the entire world. So the next patriarch is Isaac. So we know Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old, and he's that first of the multitude that was promised to Abraham. And so Abraham obeys God, and we know there's that crazy story of how God actually asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac on an altar. But then right at the last minute, God comes in and intervenes and steps in and gives an alternate sacrifice. He doesn't let Abraham sacrifice his son, which not only is showing how different this one true God is to all the gods around them, that was quite normal child sacrifice, but it's also a prophetic picture of what is going to happen in another time, in another place. Just that foreshadowing of Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross. So it's a really beautiful story, and I love, go read it, look into it. It's actually incredible. Then the covenant is passed down to Isaac. And so in Genesis 26, verse 24, we have God making that same covenant that he's made with Abraham, with Isaac. And he says, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. And so we see Isaac's family begin to grow. He has two sons, Esau, and then his younger son, Jacob. And there's like this wrestle between the two of them of who's going to get the blessing and who's going to be the one that the seed kind of is passed down through. So the family's growing, and it's paving that way for the Redeemer to come later. So Jacob is the youngest son of Isaac, and he's the third patriarch we're going to look at. So he was the youngest son, but he was renamed Israel. So you see a shift in the text. Sometimes it uses Jacob, sometimes it uses Israel. But Israel means he wrestles with God. And so we know that there's that story where Jacob has his own encounter with God. It's no longer the God of his father Isaac or the God of his grandfather Abraham. Jacob himself meets God in a place called Bethel. And it says that the Lord stood above him and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. So that's in Genesis 28, verse 13 to 15. But again, it's this covenant that he's making with Jacob or Israel. And he's setting this family apart once again so that seed of redemption that's going to come through the woman, the offspring that's going to save all mankind is promised and is blessed and will bless the whole earth through him. So Jacob ends up having 12 sons. So the family is definitely beginning to grow, definitely seeing that multiplication now. And we know that the 12 sons of Jacob or Israel become the 12 tribes of Israel later down the road. So it's this family line is growing and is actually quite significant as the nation of Israel is being set up. This is like the first moment where we meet Israel himself. So then the youngest son or second youngest actually, son of Jacob, his name was Joseph, and he's the final patriarch we're going to look at. He's kind of not mentioned as much as the other three, but played a very significant role in the history of Israel as a nation and his family. So Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery because he was the favorite son of Jacob, and they kind of didn't like that so much. So they came up with this plan to get rid of him, and he was sold and carried away to Egypt by some traders. But in Egypt, he trusted God. He never let God's word was so important to him that whatever happened, he always knew that God was going to be faithful to what he had said. And there's this incredible story of how he, time and time again, is faithful, and God blesses him for it. He listens to the Lord, he interprets the dreams of the others around him, and even though wrong keeps being done to him, he chooses to walk in forgiveness, he chooses to stand in integrity. And we see him become the second in charge to, like, Pharaoh's the only person above him in all the land of Egypt. And so through his ability to listen and hear from God, his ability to walk in faith, and the strategic mind that God gave him, he actually saves not only Egypt, but the entire region and the known world at that time from an incredibly rough famine. If he hadn't have done that, Israel and all of Israel's family, the 12 brothers, they probably would have died in the famine. And so because of what Joseph was able to do, his family survived. And so we see them actually move down to Egypt for a time. They leave the promised land, which was actually prophesied back in the original covenant that God made with Abraham in chapter 12 or 15. And the people come down, and God promises actually one day they will return to their land. You know, they're going to go to Egypt for a time, but I'll bring them back to the land I have promised them. So the family moves down from Canaan into Egypt as per God's promise back in chapter 15 of Genesis. And that kind of leads us into the next time period of Egypt and then on into the Exodus. In summary, this time period follows the story of one family, and God has chosen them, the line of Abraham, and created a covenant relationship with them in hopes to bring the promised Redeemer, the Messiah, through their family line. And so we watch as his plan for redemption begins to unfold. And it's really, when you start to look into it and you're watching and you're keeping your eye out for that thread, that seed of the Redeemer, you see all the times that the enemy tries to step in and stop that line from growing, from flourishing, from multiplying like God said it would. And yet, because of God's faithfulness, they prevail despite their own failings, despite their own, human just setbacks and fallings, and the times when they don't trust God. God still is faithful to his word, and he said that, I will do this, it will come about. And so we see it time and time again.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching the second session of the Bible overview, where Kaylee goes over the patriarch time period, and we learn about God's redemption plan through the covenant made with one family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Be sure to check out the resources in our highlight and go over the questions in the caption. And don't forget to leave a comment letting us know your favorite patriarch. And be sure to check in next week for session 3 of the Bible overview, where Michael shares how this one family became a nation.